My name is Don. I'm from Mantec. I'm their manufacturing technology advisor, and here with me is Phil Weaver from Citium. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Citium?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Don. As Don mentioned, my name is Phil Weaver. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer over at Citium Solutions. Citium is an MSP. That's a managed service provider. We are based out of Lancaster, primarily serving the market in the Mid-Atlantic region for IT and cybersecurity services. We also we do have customers throughout the U.S. and even internationally as well, but our main market is in that Mid-Atlantic region. I have 20 years of experience in the IT cybersecurity world, a variety of different industries throughout those years, manufacturing being one of them, distribution, construction, professional services, and now, of course, the managed services, the IT side.
Excellent, excellent. And what we're really hoping here today is this garnishes or fosters good questions, and this helps people get to where they need to be on their CMMC journey. With that, I know you have a few slides that were pretty informational. So if you want to run through those, and then at the end, we'll open it up to some Q&A between us, the expert, and if any of you are dealing with any of the questions that are asked, as a manufacturer, if you're dealing with these issues, please speak up. This is the best way to foster good discussion and discourse. So with that,
Absolutely.
Phil?
If you could hit the slide there. So some of the things we're going to cover today are the really what is CMMC, who needs it, and why is it needed. When is all this going to be official? There's certainly a lot of rumors and predictions floating around out there. So we'll get into those a little bit and see exactly where we're at today. How to get started on that CMMC journey? Where do you start? And then also, obviously, want to leave some time for questions and answers at anything you think of as we're going through. Slide. I'm not seeing it advancing. One more, and another. There we go. Now we're caught up. All right. So if you were to go onto Google and search what is CMMC, this is an example of what you would get. Alphabet soup. There's a lot of acronyms, right? So right away, it's a bit overwhelming with the number of acronyms. So we're going to try and put this in layman terms today. But essentially, what CMMC is, it's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC, and the Department of Defense. It's our newest verification mechanism to ensure that cybersecurity controls are adequately protecting controlled unclassified information, CUI, which resides in the Defense Industrial Base, which is the DIB, the DIB. So that's, a mouthful. I get it.
I almost need another window just to look at the acronyms.
Exactly. And that's, it certainly is the common thread throughout. In IT and cybersecurity in general, we like to use a lot of acronyms, and sometimes it becomes a bit overwhelming for
I'm finding this out.
All right. So in layman's terms, what is CMMC? And again, it's hard to see people raise their hands here, but how many of you are already working with DoD contracts? If you are, the underlying requirements here for CMMC haven't changed. These same underlying requirements have been around since 2016, and they're based on NIST 800-171. Typically, you're seeing those as part of DFARS clause in contracts today. The biggest difference with CMMC is really just that certification piece, that assessment that is now needed by that third-party assessment organization. Again, another acronym, which is the C3PAO, is going to verify that you do have the controls in place that align with that NIST 800-171.
Like an AI robot from Star Wars.
There you go. Next, please. All right. So who needs this? So all DoD primes and subcontractors that have the following data types. And for today's purposes, and quite frankly, just for CMMC in general, the first two are the most prevalent. That's that federal contract information, which is FCI, and the CUI, which we already talked about on the first slide there. Another popular one is the ITAR data, which we'll get into a little bit later as well. But there are other types of data that are covered under the CMMC guidelines. So according to the DoD, there are 350,000 suppliers who would need to meet CMMC 2.0 compliance when rulemaking is finalized. The next slide, please. So how did we get here? So this is a timeline, the DFARS CMMC 2.0 timeline. If you want to go ahead and hit the enter key there, please. Back in 2013, here we go. That might be difficult to see, but back in 2013, the DFARS clause, and for today's purposes, we are just going to focus on the last 4 digits when we're talking about DFARS clause, and we'll get into these a little bit more. If you're unsure what they are, we'll get into those a little bit more on the next slide. But basically, the DFARS clause is a contract clause, and the first one that really kind of dictated any type of cybersecurity controls was released way back in 2013, and that was DFARS 7012, and it was based on NIST 853, which was a lot more intense even than the current controls, which are 800-171. I believe there were 262 some odd controls in that clause. So if you want to hit the enter key again.
So they've actually narrowed it down.
They've pared it down, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along here. So nobody knew about this. In 2013, nobody was doing anything about this. It was there. It was, it was in contracts. There wasn't a lot of user adoption. So in 2016, after there were some cybersecurity incidents, the DoD came back and said, "Hey, we need to figure out how we can secure these contractors and subcontractors in the DIB," and they revised DFARS Clause 7012. And what they did was they prescribed. They pared down the existing controls, and they pared that down to NIST 800-171, which is still in place today. Since 2016, that's been in place. I'm going to hit enter. So again, not too many people adopted this. This was, while it was part of a lot of the contracts, there wasn't a lot of user adoption.
So people are saying, yes, we're good.
Or there really wasn't even an attestment to do that. It was really more of a honor system to say, hey, you need to do this. And there was no, attestment or no self-service score until 2020. You teed it up perfectly, Don.
Yeah, for a manufacturer that, if it's not making you money, it's hard to commit resources to it.
Absolutely. So then, again, some cybersecurity events happened in 2020. This is when you got everyone's attention, right? This was CMMC 1.0. So there were 3 DFARS clauses released in 2020, 19 and 20, 7019 and 7020 are sometimes known as the DODAM rule clause. And these are in effect. These are rules. These exist today. And again, we'll get into those a little bit more on the next slide. And then also the 7021, which is CMMC. This is where everyone perked up and the DoD got everyone's attention with these. Cool. So this was CMMC 1.0. Okay. Yep. So go ahead and hit enter, please. So based on all the feedback and the pushback, 2021, most of the year was spent reviewing CMMC 1.0. So the DoD really got got that feedback from the public, reviewed it, and then of course at the end of 2021 is really when we got Cmmc 2.0, which is where we're at today. So enter again, please. So we're still there, right? We're still in that rulemaking process. That started in 2022, and we're still kind of there with that 9 to 24 month rulemaking estimate. And again, we'll get into some of those details as we move forward here. So that's kind of how we got to where we're at today. If we get into the next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about these default clauses that we talked about already. I'm sure there's people on this meeting that are familiar with these clauses, have these in their current contracts. Right now, these three clauses that we saw on the timeline there, the 7012, the 7019, and the 7020, they are active, and all of them prescribe and tell you need to comply with NIST 800-171 compliance. The most popular one, and the one that most people are familiar with, and if you're doing this, you're very familiar with it, it's very notorious, is 7019. So 7019 is the clause that says, hey, you need to self-assess. You need to go through and you need to confirm that you comply with NIST 800-171 self-assessment, and you also then need to go and place that score in the supplier performance risk system, the SPRS score. So you go through the assessment. Each of those controls has a weighted score, and you need to have a score in that system to be awarded a contract, or even to get an RFP. So these are intact today, outside of anything changing with Cmmc. The next slide. So this is a pretty popular visual. I'm sure most of you have seen this before.
Some of these people probably have it pasted on their wall.
Yeah, exactly. So these are the new levels, right? I don't think it's beneficial to go back and look at what CMMC model 1.0 was. This is where we're at. So level 1, obviously, foundational 17 practices, annual self-assessment, not too bad, right? I think probably most people on this call would fall into that level 2 area, which is advanced. And there's 110 controls, and they align with NIST 800-171. They align perfectly with that framework.
So in all honesty, we should be pretty far along if we were doing it right.
Correct.
Cool.
Yeah, so the controls have not changed. The only thing that's changing with CMMC is that assessment part. That third party is going to come in and say, "Hey, show me what you're doing to comply." And they're obviously, and that's a very broad statement. There,
How subjective is that?
We'll get into it.
Okay.
So there's we'll talk about some of the POAMs, so the project actions and milestones, and how that plays into this assessment process. But for level 2, for all intents and purposes, you are aligning perfectly with that NIST 800-171 with 110 controls. Triannually, there will be a third-party assessment. If there are people that are on level 3, the expert level, it's NIST 800-172, which is some additional controls from the 171, and that's a government-led assessment, not a third party. So a little more intimidating there.
A little bit.
With the government.
That's someone crawling through everything.
Yeah, exactly. So another acronym here, there's plenty of them here, but this is a really important step. Is a scoping and identifying of the CUI, of that data. And this is just a way to kind of remember or to identify where you can find that information. So any CUI would be any data that's created on behalf of the contract or distributed directly from a prime or a DoD. That would be, that's data that is CUI.
Any data.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's data that's being used to deliver your contractual responsibilities to the government as part of those contracts, or it's the data that can be identified on the NRA CUI register. So there's a link here, and again, you could just Google this. This is the CUI register that includes all data that is actually considered CUI. So it's a good resource to have.
Absolutely.
If you're questioning whether you do have CUI, if you fall into the scope of CMMC, you're not sure about the deforest clause, this is a good place to start to really see if you are in scope for CMMC. Next slide, please. All right, so again with the scoping, and this, I can't stress enough, this is so critical. Really, what I'm saying here is you don't want your entire, so you have CUI, so you have data you need to protect. You don't want your entire network in scope if it doesn't need to be. So it's not only the data, so it's the people, it's the process, it's the technology that surround that CUI.
Essentially, you're talking about mitigating one of the controls that falls under the 800, right? You're lessening the point of contact for the CUI to transfer into. Absolutely,
yeah. So limiting that scope allows you to really isolate and segregate where that data lives, the technology that surrounds that data. A lot of companies, and a really popular approach is an enclave or a separate environment that's segmented from the rest of the organization. And it's used specifically to process, store, and transmit CUI. That's a very popular approach to limiting that scope and making this more digestible to start applying these controls to that, to those people, processes, technology, and data that are part of this.
Are you finding that that's a good way to go for a lot of the manufacturers or a lot of the clients that you're dealing with, is to say, hey, here's my business, here's what it encompasses. Currently, I'm having CUI funnel right into everything. Taking a cloud or a separate server and saying, hey, only CUI goes to this, is that a good way to mitigate?
It is, and it is, if it's possible. And that's the idea of that enclave. So that is definitely a good strategy, if possible. There are a lot of reasons that organizations can't do that, but it certainly is a good exercise to at least try.
So essentially, if I had, let's say, a managed service provider doing a lot of my IT, or even some of my IT, that would lower the cost of that if I lessen the users, lessen the access point, separated everything. I wouldn't necessarily have to have my entire business covered under that.
That's correct. Cool. That's absolutely correct. Yep. That's why it's so important to try and do as much as scoping and limiting of those assets that need to be protected as possible. Absolutely. Awesome. Yep. The next slide, please. All right. So this here, I'm going to get into this is an actual control. So this is the NIST SP 800-171. This is a controls document, and this is just one example of a control. And there's a reason I'm showing you this. So I just picked this one because I think it fits well on the screen. There's no rhyme or reason to be picking this. You'll notice this 381. It's just a list telling you what you need to do, and then there's just a discussion, and it gives you some information about what that control should do. Right? So we already established there's 110 of these on the NIST 800-171, and we're on revision 2 of that control. So if you want to go to the next slide, what I'm showing you here is this is NIST's website where you go and you download that control document, that 800-171. And this is what most MSPs, this is what most companies are referencing when they're working toward that NIST 800-171 compliance, even for the self-scoring that we talked about earlier, even for the self-assessment. We're pretty much focused on this control document. What a lot of people don't understand, and it's probably hard to see, but on the screen there, highlighted and at the very, very bottom right of the screen, there's another publication. It's literally another part of this publication. And it's the SP 800-171A. If you want to hit the next slide. This is the assessment template. So this is the document that is going to be used or simulates what's going to be used as part of the assessment. And the reason I'm showing you this is we keep talking about these 110 controls, and that is accurate. This assessment document, you'll notice that control we looked at, that 381, has now turned into the assessment. There's still the requirement at the top, but there's assessment objectives. On this one, there's 4 of them.
So there's that standard 110 turning over 500.
320 to be exact.
Just from that one.
Yeah. So this is an example of simply looking at the control is one thing. When it comes to the assessment, these objectives need to be met. And underneath these objectives are the actual assessment methods that are going to be used to determine that. They're called determination statements. So this is where it's very important to understand what is going to be required when these assessments actually happen. So if you want to hit the next slide there. So I show you all this to say so many people are focused on the controls. There we go. So many people are focused on the controls, and rightly so. That's what we're talking about right now. Every control has an assessment objective, which we just looked at. That one had 4. And every assessment objective has a determination statement. And for each of those determination statements, you need to provide evidence. This is where the assessment comes in. Is it a policy? Is it a control? How do you prove that it's implemented? This is where that assessment piece really comes into play. So it's important to understand and look at that, not just the 800-171, but also the 800-171A, which is the actual assessment component of this evaluation or of this assessment.
And by evidence, if you already have a written policy in place, you could submit that as your evidence. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Next slide, please. So this is another one we touched on a little bit earlier, Don. The POAMs. So plan of action and milestones. And I want to touch on this because it is a change from 1.0 to 2.0. So 1.0, there was no POAMs. There was no but you have a set time to get it implemented by and a plan of action. One of the things that CMMC 2.0 You guys are live.
It's the storm clouds rolling in.
Yeah.
Everybody
some technical
don't know what to
difficulties
do with 70-degree weather coming.
Back online? Okay. So each of the controls in this 800-171 is weighted 1, 3, and 5.
Okay.
The reason I'm bringing this up for POAMs there are, of the 5 pointers, there are 44 of them that are not eligible for POAM. So you need to have those completed as part of the assessment.
Like before anything, this
Right.
has to be done.
Right.
Okay.
And I should have done, I'm pretty sure that's only one 5-pointer. So I think there's 45 5-pointers, and of those 45, one of them is eligible for POAM.
Oh,
So, and then
that makes a big difference.
right. So 14 of the 3-pointers aren't eligible for POAM. So ultimately, while POAMs are available, you would need to have 88 of the 110 controls in place before you could even think about writing a poem for any remaining controls. So a lot of this, so I say all this to say, if organizations are going into this thinking, hey, we're going to schedule our assessment, we're going to use the plan of actions and milestones to get us over that hump to say, we're not compliant, but we're going to be soon. This is the criteria. You still got to do a lot of the work before you would even be eligible for a poem.
Well, that's good to know, but I know I have clients right now that have done, miscellaneous steps trying to mitigate their controls and stuff. Well,
right. The other thing that I'll say about the plan of action and milestones for CMMC 2.0 is they are going to strictly enforce the dates on it. In other words, you can't go more than 180 days at this point.
So
again,
once you write
change.
one, you have to remediate
Correct.
that poem within, it's 180.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's a 90-day option and a 180.
I did see a 90-day.
Yeah, a 90-day and 180-day. So more to come on that with when rulemaking is final.
Do we know what would happen if it pushed past 180? I mean, obviously no bid on contract, but would you have to rewrite the poem, or is there just not enough sufficient data to say otherwise?
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I think potentially that could void the contract, but who's to say? Right. And who's going to go back and look? I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to make any speculations, and I'm not an attorney either, so I'm going to say that I don't pretend to be an attorney. Yeah, exactly. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. All right. So the question everybody wants to know is, when is all this going to be official? And I don't have an answer, but I can give you some insight on kind of where we're at today. So back in April of 2022, the director of CMMC indicated that this would be in play in May of 2023. So soon, right? And it would start applying, you would start seeing this in contracts. It would be a phased rollout into contracts starting in July of 2023. So this summer.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what, we've been skating along on here for, since that time. Nothing's really been released. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Here's where we're sitting today, and we'll give some scenarios. So obviously, as we indicated, we're still in that rulemaking phase of CMMC 2.0, and there's two scenarios. So scenario one would be if this is released as a proposed rule, this would allow the public to comment after this rule is adjudicated and published. This would allow the public comments, which would delay this. We wouldn't see this in contracts until summer of 2024, so next summer, right?
Sooner than the 2025, but
right. So the scenario number two is the interim final rule, and this is really what the DoD has been pushing for since the beginning. This would effectively allow it to be implemented almost immediately, right? So this is, it would not allow for public comments, and it would be rolled out this summer yet. This is what the DoD has really been pushing for. And just this bottom, I didn't know where else to put this on my slide deck, but just since people are starting to do the time crunch in their minds,
yes.
This is again, there's a lot of, this is very subjective, but for a 50 to 100 person company to implement 800-171 on average, that's taking a year to a year and a half.
I'd say that timeline falls correct with some of the other clients that I've worked with.
Yeah.
That year to you do it yourself, you go through an assessment, you remediate, and you submit your score.
Right. So we want to go ahead and go to the next one. So those are our two scenarios. So what's been happening in the news, and you'll notice these, hopefully you can see some of the text here. There are certainly some indications that it's not going the DoD's way, meaning it's going to be released as a proposed rule, not the interim final rule. So, there's been a lot of, if you could see the dates on any of these, the one right in the middle that has a yellow highlight, that was just yesterday. So that was a news article released yesterday, and it's saying most likely delayed, or no, CMC roles will be delayed perhaps till 2024. So there's, again, this isn't me saying that this is going to be delayed, but there certainly is recent news activity that are leaning towards this is going to be, you probably won't see this in contracts till 2024, but that's just, some Google searching on my part.
I'm more than welcome. I welcome best guess scenarios more than my own.
Right. So next slide, please. So we're all really focused on these CMMC official rules to be published, and rightfully so. The other thing that is happening that needs to be brought to everyone's attention is, so again, we keep talking about this NIST 800-171, and I mentioned earlier, we're on revision 2. Well, as we discovered, that hasn't been updated since 2016. So you can imagine the technology, some of the technologies that exist in that document are very antiquated. So there is a new NIST version underway. That is official. It is happening. So version 3 or revision 3 is underway. And the speculations, again, there's no set date. The speculations would be late spring of this year. We would see a new version of 800-171.
What are we talking here? All the controls that we worked so hard to correct and make sure we're doing right are now possibly in the works for a change?
I wouldn't say so it'll build on those. It's not going to be a complete rewrite.
More or less just expansion on new technology.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And if I were a betting man, I would say it's not going to shrink in size for controls. So, maybe 110 goes to 111. But for anyone on this meeting who's worked on this stuff, one control can take you 3 months, 6 months. So, it's not necessarily the number of controls, it's the complexity or the
what they decide to squeeze into that one control.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
So this is coming, and this is something to be very conscious of. One of the other things, and we're not going to get into this in great detail here, but one of the other things that exists is this NFO controls. And I don't know if anyone knows what this is or has heard of this term. When we looked at our timeline, we went back in 2013, and there's a reason I went back that far. 2013, we had indicated that the first set of controls was not the 800-171. It was 853. That was very, very intense. So when they decided to prescribe, when the DoD decided to prescribe 800-171, they took a bunch of controls away. And the way they did that is they used these NFO controls. And basically what these NFO controls are a standard baseline. They assume that companies are at least doing this. And these are actually buried into the Appendix E of the 800-171. So the reason I bring these up is this is a very gray area that when asked, if the CMMC is going to require NFOs, their response was something, and don't quote me, their response was something like very, it's in there. So it's like a riddle, like you need to figure out, if you're doing it or not. The reason I bring this up is with NIST 800-171 revision 3, there's been a lot of public comment about these NFOs, either include them or don't. Some of these are absolutely necessary. Some of these controls are necessary to pass the assessment, but they're not necessarily specified in the main document. They're hidden in the appendix. So it's a gray area. Let's not focus on those today. If we're working towards that NIST 800-171 control set and that assessment document, we're really on our way to getting CMMC compliant.
Excellent.
So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so where do we start? We talked about this a little bit. We talked about, identifying your CMMC level, and that really coincides with number 2 as well. Finding what you have, identifying where that that FCI or CUI lives and scoping that. Very important steps. Another one is, conduct that self-assessment or partner with a third party to do an assessment to really figure out what you have, where you're at in this journey. Remember, if you have a DFARS clause 7019, you're already supposed to be doing these self-assessments on the controls. And those assessments can be used to continually find gaps and remediate those and prioritize those remediations on this journey. The other one is creating a system security plan or an SSP. So this isn't an actual, this is a requirement for CMMC, and it's really, I like to create this early because this is really a good way to outline how you're going to address the controls, and it's a good way to start building out a lot of that documentation that's going to be required when that assessment time comes. And this last one is, I would say, where we, Citium, we're a little bit different than some of our competitors in that we really like to start with fundamental cybersecurity best practices. So what I mean by that is it's one thing to go through a compliance checklist, to go through now, and certainly everyone's concerned about being CMMC compliant, but there's a lot of organizations that are compliant that aren't secure. So what we really like to start with is the basic cybersecurity, the fundamental cybersecurity best practices, and guess what? They all align with things you need to do for CMMC already. So we really like to start and make sure as we're progressing towards that CMMC certification, we're also mitigating risk for the company, which in kind of with that cost justification to say, this isn't just this disconnected.
Yeah, I think maybe we need to drag a hard line in here.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're back on.
Sorry about that. I think we lost you for a second there. But really just, back to the fundamental cybersecurity best practices. Cybersecurity insurance is requiring a lot of these fundamental components. A lot of these are part of that NIST 800-171 control. So it's a really good place to start and ease into some of these controls. One example of that, if you want to hit the next slide, one example of that is, just making sure you're on the right version of Microsoft 365. So I'm sure everyone here is using Microsoft 365, Office 365 for the most part.
Some kind of product.
Yeah. So Microsoft has a GCC product, and it's another acronym, I know, Government Community Cloud. And it's geared just for contractors like yourselves. And it's important to understand which version of that you should be on or what is required. You don't need to be on CMMC. I'm sorry, now I'm getting messed up with the acronyms. You don't need to be on GCC to meet CMMC compliance, technically. But it's highly recommended. And here's what I mean by that. And you can see this graphic here. DFARS 2012, 7012, which was instituted in 2016, has a clause that is not overwritten by CMMC. So if you have a DFARS 7012 clause in your contracts now, when CMMC comes out, there's a real good chance that clause is going to stay. Because there are some additional clauses in there. There's some additional requirements. For example, one of them is called FedRAMP. And FedRAMP it relates to cloud services. CMMC doesn't mention that at all. So there's a real good chance that 7012 stays in place. So if you do have that clause, you need to be on GCC already. If you
definitely take a look at the contracts coming in.
Absolutely. And I want to leave some time for questions here, so I'll just get through this last point. So ITAR, if anybody's dealing with ITAR, one of the requirements of ITAR is that you need to have all of your data in a US-based data center. So the only way to get that with Microsoft 365 is to be GCC high.
I got
and as you can imagine, GCC high is higher priced as well.
Yeah.
That's just one example of making sure you're right sizing that Microsoft 365 environment early on, because it makes your life a whole lot easier. And with that, questions and answers, please.
Yeah, let's open it up to the, if you guys have a question, please formulate it into the chat section, and we'll get it up here to myself and the expert.
Use that term.
I'd like to say first, I mean, how you and I came to meet. We had a mutual client that went through an assessment, and they felt that their assessment didn't get them to where they need to be and or were lacking. And you were able to step in and fill those gaps, but more or less, you were there to inform them. I know, and speaking with the client, they took away a lot of information on how to garner those next steps, how to remediate things themselves. I know they've been really happy with your advice.
No. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So that particular project client, that was a perfect example of that scoping that we talked about.
He jumped in with both feet.
Yeah. So we really needed to try to limit the amount of the amount of energy that would have been needed to take that whole network and say this whole thing needs to be in scope. So that was one of the first things we did, is really scope that to say, okay, where does this CUI really live? And started segmenting and segregating kind of that data from the rest of the network.
And I think not only where it lives, but how's it disseminated?
Oh, absolutely. And another important point with that particular case was it was an example of we took a step back almost to say, well, we know we already need these fundamental cybersecurity products. We need these technical platforms in place. And we started easing into those, not just from a CMMC perspective, but really showing the value it added to other parts of the organization. So I think it was very beneficial for the customer.
I know they've gained a lot out of it.
Yeah.
So we have a couple questions that came in. One of them, how many controls are there for level 2?
So there are 110 controls for level 2. So level 2 aligns directly today with NIST 800-171.
And to that point, though, you also need to be considerate of, like you said, there's a control, but that control may have subset A, B, C.
Correct. So when it comes to the actual assessment, it's important to look at that NIST SP 800-171A, which is the assessment template, which is really going to give you insight into what that actual assessment may look like, what that assessor may ask when he's on site, or he or she's on site, excuse me.
Gotcha.
Another one. Since this is never going away, do I need to hire IT staff, or is this something that can be managed cost effectively for my SMM?
So I work for an MSP. So that's a loaded question.
I'm not being too biased.
No, I'm not being biased at all. Trust me. So just to be clear, I've only worked on this side of the world for a year. So I've been on the private side. I was on the IT cybersecurity side for 20 plus years. I came to the consulting side a year ago. So I'm still not good at selling the MSP piece, because I feel your pain. I've been there. I say all that to say, when looking at whether you build it or buy it, it's going to be much more cost effective to partner with a company. It doesn't have to be mine. It's much more cost effective to partner with a company that has those skills and has those resources than to try and do it internally. But what I will say is there needs to be buy-in. There is no way to completely outsource this.
I agree, and I think to that point, finding an MSP that you can pair with, to where you can do your part and they can do their part, and you come together. I think that's a big plus for anybody looking for this type of thing.
Absolutely, I agree.
Here's another one with 3 questions in it. I'll ask all 3 questions, so I'm sure you can answer them.
Sure.
how far reaching is CMMC down the supply chain? How many levels should the clauses flow down every sub-supplier for a part?
Yeah, so there's flow down in all of this, and it goes it follows the data. So if the CUI is shared with any sub, it follows them all the way down.
Wow. So even
that's
if
the way I
I'm
understand
getting
it.
a part of a part and I'm still getting that CUI data, then I would technically have to fall into one of the CMMC 3.
The way I understand it, sitting here today,
Yes.
to be clear, there is a lot that the DoD is saying will be clarified when rulemaking is final. Sitting here today, my understanding would be anytime CUI, anything that's classified as CUI, again, if there's questions, go back to that register,
Right.
that flow down follows, the number of subs that touch it.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
And it looks like one more. What is a POAM and its benefits?
So we talked about the POEMs. That's a plan of action and milestones. Again, the benefits there are it gives you, even though they're limited with CMMC 2.0, it gives you some leeway
Yeah.
to say, hey, we know we need to be compliant. We're not there yet. It's something we're going to do, and here's when we're going to have it done by. And that's really the benefit that it would provide.
Excellent. Any more questions?
Don't see any more come in.
Great.
Okay. I have one. What's the benefit of doing this now as opposed to just waiting to everything, till all the rules come out? I mean, obviously, we know now that if it's in lockstep, we should be fairly close because of the 800-171. Should I wait? Should I not wait?
I wouldn't wait.
And your thoughts?
Yeah. So I would say, there are, if you're a sub, and your prime isn't pushing now, they will be soon. Again, so these DFARS clauses are in place now. 19 and 20 have, they've been in effect since 2020. If you haven't seen these yet, you will soon. These are rules.
So for the people actually getting this on their contract, I know I have a few clients that from BAE, from Huntington,
Yep.
they're in the bottom.
Yep.
So what do we say to those primes that, hey, this isn't implemented yet, or hey, we're working on this? What do you think the best course of action for something like that would be?
So for the 2019, I know there are subs who simply aren't qualified for the contract, or are discontinued, or aren't selected simply because they don't submit a SPURS score. If you don't have a SPURS score, if you're not doing that requirement, which it is a requirement, if you're not doing the self-assessment and putting some type of score in there, you're not qualified to bid. Or you're not selected, you're not sourced.
And you just think, we haven't seen much of a crackdown on that, but now we're thinking
it's a law. Yeah. So, so I would say while there may be some primes that are lax on that, and maybe it's not as prevalent as I think it is, but it is something that it's a requirement now. From CMMC, the thing I would say is, while there's a lot of speculation about what this thing turns into, it's not going away.
No, I don't think
so I think, and it's easy to sit here and spend someone else's money and say, you got to do all this. But I think, what you don't want to be is so far behind that, your competitors are doing these steps, and you get to a point where you're simply not able to get those contracts because you're not compliant. So I think it's, a competitive advantage if companies are at least taking the steps to making sure you're not too far behind with this process.
And I think with that goes along, I had a company that, a competing business just down the road, they were both deciding CMMC. I was working with both of them. One of them was just going to drop out. That actually opened the opportunity for the other client to pick up that same business from the OD. So now instead of 10% of their revenue from DOD, it became 15% or 20%, whatever the case was. So I agree with you. I think starting it now and being ahead of the game is going to be beneficial for everybody.
Absolutely. And, and I think there's a lot of organizations that really need to take a look at the ROI, right? Like what kind of, what level of business are you doing with the DoD? Does it make sense? Yeah, does it make sense to make this major investment in becoming, more secure? Me being a cybersecurity guy, I want to say I think it does, because there's a reason that the DoD is cracking down on this. And the reason is there's a lot of companies that don't have basic cybersecurity hygiene. And it not only puts, that company at risk, it's, the DoD is concerned with the information that could be exposed.
Even though it might be just a nut in a washer.
There you go.
Excellent.
One more question.
Go ahead.
Is there a template available for creating a POAM?
There is. Excellent question. There's actually one out on the NIST. If you go out and you search NIST 800-171, along the right-hand side, there's templates for POMs. POAMs. There's a template for an SSP, which is that system service plan, and there's all the other publications that are related to it. Excellent question.
Yeah, I didn't know that existed either.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else, Ron?
That's all.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I encourage you to sit on the other seminars, and I hope that this fosters good discussion. If anybody has any questions that come to them later or want to connect with Phil, please reach out to me. I'd be glad to connect. I'd be glad to answer any other questions that may come up. So, Phil, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.